London, 1844. She arrived at the estate believing she was about to meet her future, not love. She was not foolish enough to expect that, but certainty, stability, a marriage arranged with care, calculation, and quiet acceptance. The carriage wheels slowed against the gravel, the great iron gates opening as if the house itself had been expecting her. She inhaled slowly. This was it. A duke's home, a duke's name, waiting for her signature. A life decided long before her heart was ever consulted. She smoothed her gloves, lifted her chin, and prepared herself for a man she had never met, only described in letters that spoke of duty, lineage, and expectations. Yet when the carriage door opened, the Duke was nowhere to be found, no formal greeting, no imposing figure descending the steps, no measured bow from the master of the house, only silence. The butler hesitated, just a fraction too long. "His Grace regrets to inform you," he said carefully, "that he has been called away on urgent matters. He is delayed. Delayed." A word that echoed louder than it should have. She nodded politely, because that was what women like her were trained to do: accept, adapt, smile. "Of course," she replied, "I shall wait." She stepped inside the grand hall, boots clicking softly against marble floors polished by generations of obedience and secrets. And that was when she felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. From the top of the staircase, half hidden behind the carved banister, two small figures stood frozen, children, a boy and a girl, no older than 8 and 10, their eyes wide, searching, cautious, and achingly curious. They did not smile, they did not move. They simply stared at her as though she were something unexpected, something neither promised nor explained. She froze too. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the girl whispered, not quietly enough, "Is she the one?" The boy frowned. "She doesn't look scary." A pause. "She looks tired," the girl added, softer now. Something in her chest tightened. She should not have heard that, but she did, and in that single, unguarded observation, the carefully rehearsed expectations of the day began to unravel. Before she ever met the Duke, his children had met her, and nothing in the estate would remain untouched by that moment. They were introduced properly soon after, though proper felt like a generous word. Miss Clara Harrington, aged 9, possessed an unsettling sharpness for someone so young. She observed the world like a puzzle she had learned to solve early. Her brother, Thomas, 7, was quieter, his expressions thoughtful, guarded, as though words had once failed him and he had not forgiven them since. Their mother was never mentioned, not directly, but absence has a way of speaking loudly. She was offered tea in the morning room, sunlight filtering through tall windows, dust dancing lazily in the air. The children were seated across from her, stiff at first, unsure whether they were allowed to exist in her presence. She smiled. Not the practiced smile meant for ballrooms and polite company, but something gentler. "You may sit comfortably," she said. "I promise I don't bite." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Everyone says that." She laughed before she could stop herself, a real laugh, and just like that, the tension cracked. They spoke of small things, books, gardens, a stubborn cat that refused to be trained. The conversation drifted naturally, unevenly, as conversations with children often do. Time slipped. She forgot, briefly, that she was meant to impress a duke. By afternoon, the children had shown her the East Wing, the old library, and the orchard where their mother once read to them beneath an apple tree that no longer bore fruit. She used to say, "Trees listen," Thomas murmured. "She said people forget that," Clara added. That night, alone in her guest chamber, she sat by the window, staring out at unfamiliar grounds. This was not how it was meant to be. And yet, something felt oddly settled. Days passed. Morning walks, lessons by the fire, quiet dinners without ceremony. She learned their routines, their silences, their fears. She did not try to replace anyone. She simply showed up. And children, she discovered, noticed such things. On the fourth morning, Thomas slipped his hand into hers without a word. She said nothing either. When the Duke finally returned, the house felt different, lighter, warmer, and he noticed immediately. His children ran to him, laughing, talking over each other, eager to share stories he had never heard before. And then he saw her, standing near the window, sunlight brushing her profile, calm, unassuming, already part of something he did not yet understand. He had expected a stranger. Instead, he found a presence. And somewhere between surprise and curiosity, something far more dangerous stirred. The Duke of Ashford returned to his estate, believing he knew every corridor, every silence, every rule that governed his household. He was wrong. The change was subtle at first, the kind that unsettles a man more than grand disruption ever could. The doors no longer closed with the same finality. The servants moved with less caution. Laughter, actual laughter, echoed faintly through rooms that had long learned restraint. And at the center of it all stood her. She did not rush forward when he entered the morning room. She did not curtsy with rehearsed precision or attempt to impress him with politeness sharpened by ambition. She simply looked at him, calm, steady, unafraid. The Duke hesitated. A pause so brief it would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. Anyone except his children. "That's him," Clara whispered, unnecessarily. Thomas nodded. "He looks taller than I remembered." The Duke cleared his throat. "You must be," she inclined her head, "the woman you were meant to meet. Not your future Duchess, not your intended bride, just a woman." Something about that unsettled him more than it should have. They spoke later that morning, formally, as expected. Tea was served. Words were exchanged, explanations offered. "I regret my absence," he said, his tone sincere, controlled. Circumstances required immediate attention. She smiled politely. Life rarely waits for proper introductions. The corners of his mouth twitched, an involuntary reaction. She noticed and tucked the knowledge away. What followed was not courtship, it was observation. She watched the way he softened when Thomas spoke, the way his posture shifted when Clara challenged him, the way guilt sat beneath his authority like a shadow he pretended not to see. He watched her too, how she knelt to meet the children at eye level, how she listened without correcting, how she did not demand affection and received it anyway. At breakfast, Clara leaned toward her conspiratorially. "He burns the toast when he's distracted." "I do not," the Duke protested. "You absolutely do," Thomas added, solemn. She laughed. The Duke stared, and openly this time. The sound felt unfamiliar and dangerously welcome. The days unfolded with gentle unpredictability. Mornings were spent in the garden, where she taught the children to identify flowers not by name, but by feeling. "Close your eyes," she told them. "Tell me what the air smells like." Thomas frowned in concentration. "Green." "That's cheating," Clara said. "Still accurate," she replied. The Duke watched from the terrace, arms crossed, pretending not to care. But care crept in anyway. Afternoons brought lessons, not imposed, but invited. Reading aloud, writing letters to no one in particular, imagining futures without apology. Evenings were quieter. Dinners stretched longer than necessary. Conversations wandered. Silences grew comfortable. Once, as the children argued over dessert, she leaned toward him. "They argue because they feel safe enough to," she murmured. His jaw tightened. "I never intended—" "I know," she said gently. "Intentions don't always reach the places we think they do." For the first time, he did not defend himself. On the sixth night, rain trapped them indoors. The fire crackled, the children sprawled on the rug, half asleep. She sat nearby, mending a tear in Thomas's sleeve. The Duke watched her fingers move, precise, patient. "You are not what I expected," he said quietly. She did not look up. "Neither are you." That earned a soft exhale of laughter, surprised, unguarded, a dangerous thing. Laughter, scandal, however, has a way of sniffing out happiness. Whispers arrived before invitations did. A letter, a raised eyebrow at the market, a servant's pause that lasted a moment too long. She noticed, she always noticed. That night, she stood alone in the hallway, staring at a portrait of the Duke's late wife. "She would have liked you," Clara said softly from behind her. She turned. "You don't know that." "I do," the girl replied. "She liked people who stayed." Something in her chest ached. Later, in the ballroom, vast, empty, waiting for a future event, the Duke joined her. "This arrangement," he began, "it was meant to be simple." She faced him fully now. "Most arrangements pretend to be." Silence stretched. Then he said it, quietly, honestly. "My children have not smiled like this in years." She met his gaze. "Nor have you." His breath caught, just slightly. Outside, London waited. Society would not be kind. Expectations would tighten. Scandal would circle. But inside the estate, something fragile and brave had begun to form. Not yet love, but something close enough to make walking away feel impossible. If peace could be bottled, the Ashford estate had almost managed it. Almost. Morning arrived with pale winter light, and the soft rhythm of the household moving without fear. Clara recited French verbs at the breakfast table with theatrical suffering. Thomas attempted to hide a piece of toast beneath his napkin, as if it were contraband. The Duke, in a rare moment of domestic vulnerability, stared at his coffee, like it had personally offended him. And she sat among them as though she had always belonged there. It was precisely that feeling, belonging, that made the outside world so dangerous. Because London did not reward women for becoming necessary. London punished them for it. A carriage arrived just after midday. Not grand, not official, but unmistakably ton. The footman delivered a cream-coloured envelope, sealed with wax, and an elegant crest. An invitation. Of course it was an invitation. Society never wasted a good excuse to gather, even when the gathering was only a polite excuse to sharpen their curiosity. She watched the Duke read it. His expression did not change, but something in his shoulders tightened. "A ball," he said, as if the word tasted like obligation, "at Lady Fairhaven's." Clara's eyes lit up, wickedly delighted. "A ballroom!" Thomas looked less pleased. "Do we have to?" The Duke glanced at them, then at her, measuring, weighing. "It would be noticed if we didn't attend." There it was, the first visible thread of the net, notice. She felt it wrap around her wrists without touching. "I understand," she said softly, but the Duke's gaze lingered. "Do you?" The question was heavier than it should have been, as if he were asking whether she understood the invisible rules that could ruin a woman in a single evening. She met his eyes. "I understand London. I've lived there." His jaw tightened. "Not like this. Not like a woman arriving at a duke's estate while he was away. Not like a woman already adored by his children. Not like a woman who might become duchess without the proper story to protect her." That evening, Clara dragged her into the music room with the authority of a tiny general. "We must practice," the girl declared, hands on her hips. "If we're going to the ballroom, you cannot walk like a frightened rabbit." "I don't walk like a frightened rabbit," she protested. Clara's stare was merciless. "Yes, you do." Thomas sat on the window seat, legs swinging. "Rabbits are nice." Clara rolled her eyes. "We're not trying to be nice. We're trying to survive." The honesty of that made her laugh, briefly. Then she knelt in front of Clara, smoothing the girl's hair with gentle fingers. "You shouldn't have to think about survival," she said. Clara's face hardened for a moment. "Too old for 9. "We already do," Thomas added quietly. "Father thinks we don't." The words landed like a small betrayal of truth. Not malicious, just real. She stood slowly and looked toward the corridor, where the Duke's footsteps could be heard in the distance. He did think they didn't. Or perhaps he wanted to believe they didn't, because the alternative would require him to face what his absence had done. Later, when the children had been tucked in and the estate had settled into silence, she found the Duke in the library. He was not reading, he was holding a letter, creases along the paper like it had been unfolded and refolded too many times. He looked up as she entered. "Do you know what London will say about you?" he asked without preamble. The firelight caught the sharp line of his cheekbone. He looked carved from restraint and sleeplessness. She kept her voice steady. "London says something about everyone." "Yes," he replied, eyes dark, "but this will be different." She stepped closer, careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. "They'll call me ambitious," she said quietly, "or desperate, or clever." He said nothing. She continued, gentler now. "They'll call you careless, or arrogant, or cruel." His eyes flickered. "Or," she added, "they'll call you a man who can't stay away from scandal." At that, a bitter humor flashed across his face. "I have avoided scandal my entire life." "Then perhaps," she said, voice light with a softness that almost resembled teasing, "it's finally your turn to be interesting." For the first time, he laughed, properly laughed, low and surprised, and she felt something in herself respond. Not fear, not obligation, a spark. He sobered quickly, as if remembering he was not allowed happiness for long. "I did not invite you here to be harmed," he said. "This arrangement was meant to protect you." She folded her arms. "Protect me from what?" "Life." His gaze sharpened. "From London." She exhaled. "You can't protect a woman from London. You can only stand beside her while it tries." The words hung between them, bold as a confession. His eyes lowered to her hands, arms crossed, posture firm, and then back to her face. "And if I stand beside you," he murmured, "it will not be gentle." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking for gentle." Silence. He looked away first. The next day brought shopping. Not glamorous shopping, practical shopping. Clara insisted on coming along, because Clara insisted on most things. Thomas came too, but only if he could bring the estate's ancient spaniel, who drooled on the hem of her cloak and looked delighted to be included in society. The town was small enough that people pretended not to stare. The kind of staring done through polite blindness. Clara walked on her other side like a guardian. "She's brave," Clara announced loudly to no one in particular. A woman at a stall blinked. "Oh," Clara nodded with fierce certainty. "She stayed." The woman's expression shifted, softened, then sharpened as though she was measuring the cost of gossip. "She stayed," the woman repeated, voice thoughtful. "That does sound brave." The sentence traveled like smoke. She felt it. London's lungs filling. Back at the estate, the Duke met them in the foyer. Thomas ran to him, chattering about the dog's heroic effort to steal a sausage. Clara presented a ribbon she had chosen, then glanced at the Duke with a look that said, "Do not ruin this." The Duke's gaze landed on her, not on her clothes, not on her posture, on her face, wind-kissed, cheeks faintly flushed from the cold. "You went into town," he said. She smiled. "I did." His voice lowered. "Without me?" She lifted her eyebrows. "Am I meant to ask your permission?" He paused. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "I suppose I deserved that." The exchange was simple, almost nothing, yet in it she felt the shift. He wasn't trying to manage her anymore. He was beginning to see her. That night, Clara asked for a story, not a children's tale, not a fairy story. A real one, Clara insisted, curled beneath blankets. Tell us something true. Thomas nodded, eyes half-lidded, but not too sad. She hesitated. Then she told them a story about a woman she once knew, someone who had been told her worth depended on obedience, someone who learned, slowly, that courage could be quiet, that survival could look like saying no politely. Clara's eyes shone. Thomas yawned, comforted. When she finished, Clara whispered, "That woman, did she win?" She considered it. "She did," she said softly, "but not because someone rescued her. Because she decided she was worth rescuing." Clara smiled, a small, secret smile, and tucked her head under her pillow like a girl who had been given permission to hope. In the corridor outside the nursery, she found the Duke waiting. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but his eyes were softer than usual. "I heard part of it," he admitted. She looked at him, cautious. "And," he exhaled, "you speak to them like they are already strong." "They are," she said. His gaze drifted toward the closed nursery door. "I spent years trying to keep them from pain. And in doing so," she replied gently, "you kept them from living." The truth stung, but he didn't flinch away. Instead, he looked at her as if seeing a path he had never considered. "I don't know how to do this," he confessed, quiet as a prayer. "Be here, be—" "Enough." Her voice softened. "Then learn." He swallowed. A man like him, proud, guarded, did not easily admit ignorance. Yet he had, and she felt something inside her lean toward him, dangerous and tender. "Why are you helping us?" he asked suddenly. "Truly." She hesitated, then spoke with honesty that didn't feel like weakness. "Because I know what it is to be unwanted," she said, "and I refuse to watch children believe that's what love is." His eyes darkened. "And what about you?" Her breath caught. "What about me?" He stepped closer, just one step, but it changed the air. "What do you refuse for yourself?" he asked. She held his gaze, heart beating too loud in her chest. "I refuse," she whispered, "to be someone's convenient solution." Silence. His voice dropped, rougher. "Then don't be." The words sounded like a promise or a temptation. The next morning, scandal arrived properly, not whispers, not stares. A letter, delivered with too much confidence. The Duke opened it in his study. She waited in the doorway, feeling the tension in the way the servants moved. Clara and Thomas played in the hallway, blissfully unaware of the blade approaching. The Duke read. His face went still. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up slowly, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something raw behind his eyes. "It's from Lady Fairhaven," he said. "She is delighted we will attend." He held up the letter, and there it was, hidden behind politeness like a dagger behind lace, a line inviting the Duke and his guest, and another line, sweet as poison, suggesting it would be a pity if the future Duchess were not properly introduced, given the unusual circumstances of her arrival. Her stomach tightened. London already knew, and London had already begun to sharpen its smile. The Duke's voice was quiet. "They intend to force a story out of us." She swallowed. "Then we give them one." He stared at her. "What story?" She met his gaze, courage steadying her spine. "The truth," she said, "or a lie worth surviving." His expression shifted. Admiration, fear, something else. "Either way," he murmured. "Once we step into that ballroom, there will be no turning back." She nodded, heart pounding. "I know." And behind them, in the hallway, Clara's laughter rang out like a warning and a blessing. Because the invitation had been delivered, and the trap had been set, and somewhere in London someone was waiting, not to celebrate a romance, but to expose a woman brave enough to change a duke's household, and perhaps to destroy her before she could become his redemption. If the ballroom was a battlefield, then preparation was armor. And armor, she learned quickly, was never as light as it appeared. The modiste arrived just after breakfast, a woman with sharp eyes, sharper pins, and the unmistakable confidence of someone who had dressed scandal into respectability more times than she could count. She circled her slowly. The woman murmured. Not fragile. She raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon? The modiste smiled thinly. That's a compliment. From the doorway, Clara watched with intense interest. She doesn't need ruffles, the girl declared. Ruffles look like excuses. The modiste blinked, then laughed. I like this one. Thomas, sprawled on the rug with a book, glanced up. Father says ruffles distract people. The Duke, passing behind them with deliberate indifference, paused. I did not say that. Yes, you did, Clara replied sweetly. When Aunt Eleanor wore them and everyone whispered. The Duke coughed. That was a different situation. She caught his eye over the modiste's shoulder. Was it? She asked lightly. For a moment, humor flickered between them, brief, private. Then the weight returned. Fittings took hours. Pins tugged. Fabric whispered. Decisions were made not for beauty, but for survival. This neckline says confidence, the modiste explained. This sleeve says restraint. And what does the color say? She asked. That you were invited, the woman replied honestly. Not desperate. She nodded. That mattered. By midday, exhaustion crept into her bones, the kind that came from being measured not by who you were, but by how well you could endure scrutiny. She retreated to the garden afterward, needing air that was not heavy with judgment. The Duke found her there. She sat on the stone bench near the rose arbor, hands folded, eyes closed, face turned toward the weak winter sun. For a moment, he simply watched, not as a duke, not as a man guarding his legacy, as someone learning restraint where once there had only been control. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. She opened her eyes. Do what? Step into that room knowing they intend to dissect you. She studied him. They intend to do that whether I go or not, he exhaled. You don't owe me. She stood. I don't owe you, she agreed. But I owe myself. He looked at her then, really looked, not composed, not strategic, brave, and something inside him shifted. You frighten London, he said softly. She smiled faintly. Good. That afternoon, Clara insisted on a rehearsal. A walking rehearsal, she clarified, dragging her into the long gallery. You must practice entering. Entering what? She asked. Society, Clara replied, entirely too serious. The Duke leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, pretending not to be invested. Clara positioned her at one end of the gallery. You walk, Clara instructed, as if you belong, because you do. She took a breath and walked, slow, steady, unapologetic. Her posture shifted, not rigid, not submissive, present. When she reached the end, she stopped. Clara nodded once. Good. The Duke said nothing, but when she turned toward him, his gaze lingered longer than propriety allowed. Later, when the children were distracted with supper, he spoke. You command a room, he said quietly. Without asking permission. She tilted her head. Does that trouble you? He considered it. No, he replied. It unsettles me. She smiled. That's honest. He returned the smile, slower this time, softer, Dangerous. Evening brought quiet. A fire, low voices, the estate holding its breath. She sat by the hearth, reading. He stood nearby, pretending to review correspondence. Neither read, neither reviewed. Finally, he spoke. "If this were merely an arrangement," he said, "tonight would be simple." She closed her book gently. "And because it isn't, because my children are already attached to you," he said, voice low. "And because I find myself reluctant to imagine this house without you." Her heart thudded. Once, sharp. "That sounds like affection," she said carefully. "It sounds like risk," he corrected. She met his gaze. "They're often the same." Silence stretched, thick, intimate. He stepped closer. Not too close. Close enough to feel the warmth of him. "I will not allow them to humiliate you," he said. "And if they try?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "Then London will learn that I am not a patient man." She studied him. The Duke. The father. The man. "And what if I choose to speak for myself?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Then," he said quietly, "I will stand beside you." Something in her chest loosened. Not love, but the beginning of trust. The night before the ball, Clara slipped into her room after dusk. She sat on the edge of the bed, uncharacteristically quiet. "They'll stare," Clara said finally. "Yes," she replied. "They'll whisper." "Yes. They might be unkind." She reached for Clara's hand. "They might." Clara swallowed. "Will you leave afterward?" The question pierced deeper than any insult ever could. She knelt in front of the girl. "I don't make promises I can't keep," she said gently. "But I promise this. I will never leave because I'm afraid." Clara nodded, eyes shining. "That's enough." They hugged, fierce, brief, honest. In the hallway, unseen, the Duke listened and understood. The ballroom arrived like a storm dressed in candlelight. Music, silk, expectation. As the carriage rolled toward Lady Fairhaven's estate, she felt the weight settle fully. The Duke offered his arm. She hesitated, just a breath, then took it. Inside, chandeliers blazed, fans fluttered, conversations paused, just slightly. Enough. She felt it. The moment London decided to pay attention, whispers rippled, eyes sharpened. The Duke leaned toward her, voice low. "Remember, breathe." She smiled faintly. "I intend to." They stepped forward together. And somewhere across the room, a woman smiled, slow, deliberate, Lady Fairhaven watching, waiting, because the game had begun. A ballroom never announced its cruelty. It disguised it in music. The violins lifted, light and elegant, as if nothing dangerous had ever happened beneath crystal chandeliers. Silk brushed silk. Fans fluttered like innocent wings. Laughter moved in practiced patterns, each note perfectly placed. And yet, the moment she crossed the threshold beside the Duke, London had already decided not to welcome her, but to test her. The whispers began softly, like rain against glass. "Is that her?" So soon. How bold of her. Or how desperate. She felt it in the tightening of her spine, the subtle shift of bodies angling away, or closer, drawn by curiosity, sharpened into hunger. The Duke's arm remained firm beneath her hand. That alone unsettled them. They had expected distance, control, a polite separation. Instead, they were offered unity. Lady Fairhaven approached with exquisite timing, her smile smooth as polished marble. "My dear Duke," she said warmly, eyes flicking to her, "and you must be the lady who has caused such interest." Interest. The word hovered, sharp-edged. She met Lady Fairhaven's gaze calmly. "I hadn't realized I had." "Oh, one never does," the woman replied sweetly. "Until one arrives unexpectedly, A pause. The Duke's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, she did. "Unexpected," she said gently, "is often just another word for inconvenient." A ripple of reaction moved through the small circle around them. Lady Fairhaven blinked just once, then laughed lightly. How refreshing. Not everyone agreed. They had not been standing long before the first blade was drawn. A young woman, pretty, bored, cruel in the way only boredom allows, tilted her head and addressed the Duke directly. "Your Grace," she said, voice syrupy, "I hope you'll forgive the question, but London is so very curious." Curious? Of course it was. "About," the Duke replied coolly. The woman smiled wider. "About whether we are to congratulate you." Silence fell. Not complete. Ballrooms never truly fell silent, but focused, targeted. She felt her heart thud once. Hard. The woman continued. "After all, your guest arrived at your estate while you were away. How unconventional." Eyes turned. Waiting. The Duke opened his mouth. She touched his arm, just lightly, enough to stop him. She stepped forward. "London enjoys stories," she said calmly, her voice carrying further than she expected, "and when it doesn't receive one quickly enough, it invents its own." A few heads tilted, interest sharpened. "But let me spare you the trouble," she continued. "I arrived with an agreement, not an expectation, and I stayed, not because I was instructed to, but because I was welcomed." A murmur spread. Welcomed. The word landed differently than scandal ever could. The woman flushed. By whom? She smiled then, not sweetly, not defensively, truthfully. By those who mattered. Across the room, Clara watched from behind a pillar, Thomas beside her. "They're talking about her," Thomas whispered. Clara nodded, jaw set. "I know." "Is she in trouble?" Clara hesitated, then shook her head. "No, they are." The Duke stepped beside her again. Not in front of her. Beside. And when he spoke, his voice carried authority sharpened by something far more dangerous than rank. Conviction. "My household is not a rumor," he said evenly, "nor is my guest a subject for speculation." The room stilled. He continued, eyes sweeping the gathered faces. "Any woman who chooses to step into my home does so under my protection, and any suggestion otherwise is not only insulting," he paused, "it is incorrect." A collective breath was drawn, some in admiration, some in fear. Lady Fairhaven's smile tightened. "Well," she said lightly, "how fortunate for London that clarity has arrived." She inclined her head to her. "You must forgive us. We so rarely witness such unity." The word dripped with implication. She met Lady Fairhaven's gaze. "Perhaps," she replied softly, "that is why it unsettles you." The dance began soon after. An invitation, polite, cautious, extended to the Duke. He looked at her, not asking, offering. "May I?" he asked quietly. Her pulse quickened. "Yes," she replied. They took their places. The music swelled, and London watched. His hand at her waist was steady, respectful, but warm. She felt it, felt him. "You did not have to speak," he murmured as they moved. She met his gaze. "You didn't have to stand beside me." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I wanted to." The admission, simple, honest, sent a shiver through her. Around them, eyes followed every step, waiting for a misstep. It did not come. They moved in perfect, unspoken harmony. Not rehearsed, understood. And in that understanding, something shifted, not just for them, for the room. Then came the second strike, sharper, crueler. A voice, older, practiced, rose from the edge of the circle. "How touching," a matron said, fan snapping shut, "though one does wonder what the late Duchess would think of all this." The air went cold. That name, unspoken, sacred, weaponized. Her breath caught. She felt the Duke stiffen beside her, and then, before anyone could stop her, she turned. "I imagine," she said quietly, "that a woman who loved her children would be grateful to see them laughing again." Gasps. The matron's eyes widened. The Duke stared at her, not in anger, in awe. "And if that troubles anyone," she continued, voice steady though her heart raced, "then perhaps the discomfort lies not in remembrance, but in guilt, silence, heavy, unforgiving." Then applause, scattered at first. Tentative, but real. The matron flushed crimson. Lady Fairhaven's smile vanished entirely. They left early, not fleeing, choosing. Outside, the night air wrapped around them like release. The Duke exhaled slowly. "You have no idea what you just did," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "I spoke the truth." "Yes," he replied, "and London rarely forgives that." The carriage door closed. Darkness cocooned them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached for her hand. This time, she did not hesitate. "I will not pretend this ends tonight," he said. "There will be consequences." She nodded. "I know." He squeezed her hand, gentle, firm. "But," he added, voice lower, "I will not allow you to face them alone." Her breath hitched. "Why?" she asked softly. He turned toward her, eyes intense, unguarded. "Because somewhere between my children's laughter and your courage," he said, "you became essential." The words settled between them, heavy, tender, dangerous. She swallowed. "That sounds like love." He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned closer, close enough that his breath brushed her cheek. "It sounds," he murmured, "like the beginning." Their foreheads touched, just that. No kiss, no promise spoken aloud, yet everything changed. Back at the estate, Clara waited at the top of the stairs. "Did you win?" she asked. She smiled softly. "We survived." Clara nodded. "That's better." The Duke watched the two of them, and understood, with sudden, startling clarity, that whatever had begun was no longer an arrangement, it was a choice. And London, furious and fascinated, would not let it end quietly. London's retaliation did not arrive loudly. It arrived politely. Invitations stopped coming. Visits were postponed indefinitely. Carriages turned down other streets when they saw the Ashford crest. It was a punishment designed to look accidental, and it was working. The estate felt quieter, not peaceful, but hollowed. She noticed it first in the servants' careful glances, in the way conversation paused when she entered a room. Not unkind, not accusing, concerned. Because London had decided that proximity to her was risky. She understood the message perfectly. "You may stay, but you will not belong." The children felt it too. Clara returned from her tutor one afternoon, uncharacteristically silent. "They asked questions," the girl said later, sitting stiffly at the window seat. "What kind of questions?" she asked gently. Clara hesitated. "About you." Thomas, listening nearby, scowled. "They said she wasn't proper." She felt something twist inside her. "And what did you say?" she asked. Clara lifted her chin. "I said proper people don't make other people cry." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Then I told them father would be very angry." She laughed softly, proud and pained all at once, and pulled them both close. But later that night, alone in her room, the weight returned. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, hair loosened, eyes tired, posture still upright. London was patient. It would wait until doubt did its work. And doubt was beginning to whisper. Was she selfish for staying? Was she damaging the children she wanted to protect? Was courage worth the cost when the cost belonged to others? A knock interrupted her thoughts. The Duke stood in the doorway, jacket removed, sleeves rolled, tension written plainly across his face. "They've cancelled the charity luncheon," he said, without explanation. She nodded. "I expected that." "They've withdrawn invitations from the children," he added, jaw tight. "Play dates, lessons, social calls." That hurt more. She inhaled slowly. "That was faster than I thought." He stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. "This is not your fault," he said firmly. She met his gaze. "It is my presence." Silence stretched. Then he said the words she had been dreading. "They are using you to punish me." Her throat tightened. "Then perhaps," she said carefully, "the simplest solution is—" "No," he cut in, sharp, immediate. "No," he repeated, softer now but unyielding. "Do not finish that sentence." She swallowed. "Your children are stronger than London," he said, "and so are you." She looked away, emotion threatening to break her composure. "I have spent my life avoiding scandal," he continued quietly. "Do you know what it cost me?" She shook her head. "Presence," he said. "Courage. Risk." He stepped closer. "I will not make the same mistake twice." Her voice wavered. "What if staying destroys them?" His eyes softened. "What if leaving teaches them the wrong lesson?" That landed hard. The next morning, London made its move clearer. A letter arrived, unsealed, audacious, not an invitation, a warning. It spoke of reputations, of impressions, of the importance of tradition, of how quickly things could spiral when boundaries were ignored. And tucked neatly between the lines was a suggestion. A quiet departure would be appreciated. She folded the letter slowly. "So this is how they do it," she murmured. The Duke read it in silence. Then, with deliberate calm, he tore it in half. Once, twice, again. "I am done being managed," he said. That afternoon, she took refuge in the nursery. Thomas built a fortress from books. Clara sat cross-legged beside her, braiding a ribbon with fierce concentration. "They don't like you," Clara said suddenly. "No," she replied gently. "They don't?" Clara frowned. "Then why don't you leave?" There it was, the question everyone else was too polite to ask. She met the girl's gaze. "Do you want me to?" she asked. Clara shook her head immediately. "No." Thomas looked up. "If you leave, will Father go quiet again?" Her chest tightened. "I don't know," she admitted. Clara considered that. "Then stay." It wasn't a plea, it was a decision. She hugged them both, holding on longer than usual. That evening, the Duke gathered the household, servants, staff, everyone. They stood uncertainly, sensing significance. He spoke without notes, without ornament. "I am aware," he said evenly, "that my household has become a subject of speculation." Murmurs rippled. He continued, "Let me be clear. Anyone who remains under my roof does so with my full confidence and protection." His gaze swept the room. "Those who are uncomfortable may leave, with references intact." No one moved. Silence. Then the housekeeper stepped forward. "We're not afraid of London," she said simply. Others nodded. The Duke exhaled. Something settled. Later, under the soft glow of lamplight, she found him in the study. He looked tired, not defeated, resolved. "You shouldn't fight this for me," she said quietly. He looked up. "I'm not." He stood, moving toward her. "I'm fighting it for my children," he said, "for myself." He paused, "and for the woman who refused to be a convenient solution." Her breath caught. "You remember that?" she whispered. "I remember everything you say," he replied. The honesty in his voice undid her. "I'm afraid," she admitted. He reached for her hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. "So am I," he said, "but not of this." He squeezed gently. "Of losing it." The next day, London received its answer. The Duke published an announcement, formal, public, Impossible to ignore. He would host a winter gathering at Ashford, open doors, no exclusions, children included, and beside his name, hers, not titled, not hidden, acknowledged. The reaction was immediate. Shock, outrage, fascination. She read the announcement in silence. "You didn't warn me," she said finally. He met her gaze. "I wanted you to see it as the world will." Her heart raced. "This will escalate everything." "Yes," he said calmly. "That's the point." She laughed softly, half disbelief, half admiration. "You're declaring war." He smiled faintly. "No." He stepped closer. "I'm declaring choice." That night, as snow began to fall outside the windows, she stood alone in the ballroom, empty now, waiting. She imagined the whispers returning, the stares, the judgment, and beneath it all, something new. Hope. She felt him behind her before she heard him. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly, "even now." She turned. "I know," she replied. He searched her face. "Then why do you?" She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him. "Because I want a life where courage isn't punished," she said. "And because your children deserve to see a woman who doesn't disappear when things grow difficult." His voice dropped. "And what do you deserve?" She held his gaze. "To be chosen," she said, "not arranged." Silence. Then, softly, deliberately, "I choose you," he said. The words weren't dramatic, they were certain. She inhaled shakily. "That sounds like love," she whispered. He smiled, gentle, reverent. "It is," he said, "if you'll let it be." Snow fell heavier outside, and for the first time since arriving at the estate, she felt the future open instead of close. Ashford had not hosted an open gathering in years. That fact alone made London uneasy. Carriages arrived in cautious intervals, wheels crunching over gravel dusted with fresh snow. Guests stepped down with measured expressions, curious, guarded, hungry for spectacle but wary of consequence. Open doors were dangerous things. They invited observation, and observation invited judgment. She stood at the top of the staircase, hands steady, breath slow, not hidden, not presented like a trophy, present. The Duke stood beside her, not a step ahead, not behind, together. Below them, the ballroom glowed with candlelight, music drifting upward in soft, deliberate notes. Children's laughter echoed briefly from a side corridor before being hushed by an over-enthusiastic governess. Clara peeked out from behind a column, grinning. "They came," she whispered. "Yes," she replied. "They did, and they look nervous," Thomas added, eyes bright. She smiled. "As they should." The descent felt longer than it was. Each step was a statement. She felt eyes settle, lift, narrow. He offered his arm, not as protection, but as partnership. She took it. They entered the ballroom together. The reaction was immediate. Conversation faltered. Fans paused mid-flutter. A few smiles stiffened. Lady Fairhaven stood near the centre, posture immaculate, expression unreadable. "So bold," someone murmured. "So reckless," whispered another. "So very public." Good, she thought. Let them see. The evening unfolded in controlled chaos. Guests circulated carefully, choosing when to approach, when to observe from a distance. Compliments were offered with edges. Questions dressed themselves as concern. "How delightful to see the estate so lively," a gentleman remarked. "It's been far too quiet," she replied pleasantly. The Duke watched every exchange, not possessive, but attentive. When she faltered just once, his hand found the small of her back. Grounding. When he grew tense, she tilted her head toward him, murmuring something soft enough to make him exhale. They learned each other quickly. In public, they spoke with restraint. In silence, they spoke volumes. Clara took her role seriously. She escorted guests with exaggerated politeness, announcing refreshments with theatrical flair. "This way," she said firmly, gesturing toward the table. "You're blocking the lemonade." A woman blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Clara smiled sweetly. "It's very important lemonade." The Duke hid a smile behind his glass. Thomas lingered near the musicians, absorbed, tapping his fingers to the rhythm. "They're not afraid," she murmured to the Duke. "No," he replied softly. "They're learning." As the night deepened, so did the tension, not explosive, strategic. She felt it when a certain group clustered near the windows, when voices dropped too low, when glances sharpened. Lady Fairhaven approached again, this time accompanied by a man she did not recognize. Tall, reserved, eyes too observant to be harmless. "Your Grace," Lady Fairhaven said smoothly. "May I present Lord Halcombe?" The name stirred something faint and unpleasant in the Duke's expression. "Lord Halcombe," the Duke acknowledged coolly. The man inclined his head. "An impressive gathering." She met his gaze and felt the weight of assessment. "You must be the lady," Lord Halcombe said. "I am," she replied. A pause. "How curious," he continued, "that one so recently arrived has become so integral." There it was, the blade. She smiled politely. "Some places welcome you before they know your name." Lord Halcombe's eyes flicked to the Duke, or perhaps they are simply vulnerable. The Duke's voice cut in, measured, dangerous. "Careful," he said. Lord Halcombe smiled thinly. "Of course." But his gaze lingered on her, speculative, unsettling. Later, the Duke found her near the terrace doors, breath fogging slightly as cold air brushed in. "You were quiet with Halcombe," he said. She nodded. "He wasn't here for pleasantries." "No," the Duke agreed. "He rarely is." She studied him. "You know him?" "Yes." The way he said it, short, restrained, told her more than his words. "He has interests," the Duke continued, "in estates, in legacies, in vulnerabilities," she added. He met her gaze. "Exactly." She hesitated. "Does he know something?" The Duke didn't answer immediately. That worried her. Music shifted. A waltz, slow, intimate. An invitation hovered in the air. The Duke offered his hand. "Dance with me," he said quietly, not as a performance, as an anchor. They moved onto the floor. This time there were no whispers, only watching. He placed his hand at her waist, steady, certain. She rested her hand against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through layers of silk and restraint. "You don't owe them anything," he murmured as they moved. She met his gaze. "I know. I want you to hear me say this," he continued. "Whatever comes next, I will not retreat." Her heart swelled, fear and hope braided together. "Neither will I," she replied. They turned, skirts brushing the polished floor. And for a moment, just a moment, London faded. There was only movement, trust, something dangerously close to joy. The interruption came quietly. A servant approached, expressions strained. "Your Grace," he murmured. "There is a matter." The Duke stiffened. She felt it instantly. He turned to her. "I need to attend to this." She nodded. "I'll wait." He hesitated, then leaned closer. "Do not be alone," he whispered. Her pulse quickened. "Is it that serious?" "Yes," he said, and then he was gone. She remained near the edge of the ballroom, accepting polite conversation, watching the room with heightened awareness. Lady Fairhaven's gaze found hers, sharp, triumphant. Then Lord Halcombe appeared again. "You look calm," he said, "for someone at the center of such uncertainty." She smiled faintly. "Calm is often a choice." He leaned slightly closer. "Choices have consequences." "So do threats," she replied evenly. His smile widened. "I wonder," he said softly, "if you know everything about the house you've chosen." Her stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He studied her, deliberately. "The late Duchess," he continued. Her passing was unfortunate. The word landed like ice. Yes, she said carefully. Some would say, he added, that grief leaves more than one victim. Her breath caught. What are you implying? That history, he said smoothly, has a habit of repeating itself. Her hands clenched at her sides. Say what you mean, she demanded. He inclined his head. Ask the Duke. Then he stepped away, leaving her standing amidst candlelight and unspoken danger. She found the Duke moments later in the study, alone, jaw tight, hands braced against the desk. You should have told me, she said. He looked up, startled. Told you what? That Halcombe knows something, she replied. Something about your wife. Silence, heavy. Then he spoke, quietly. He believes, the Duke said, that her death was not an accident. Her heart dropped. And do you? She asked. He closed his eyes briefly. I believe, he said, that London has been waiting for a reason to destroy this family. She stepped closer. And if the truth gives them one, he met her gaze, raw now. Then I will protect my children, he said. At any cost. She reached for his hand. And what about us? She whispered. He squeezed back, hard. That, he said, is what frightens them most. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, Ashford buzzed with speculation. And somewhere within London's careful cruelty, a secret stirred, old, unresolved, sharp enough to cut through even the bravest resolve. The past never announced itself. It waited. Morning arrived pale and unforgiving. Snow pressed flat against the windows, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Ashford, so alive the night before, felt quieter now, alert in a way that had nothing to do with peace. She had barely slept. Lord Halcombe's words replayed relentlessly, each repetition sharpening their edge. History has a habit of repeating itself. She found the Duke in the study just after dawn, standing exactly where she had left him hours earlier. You didn't move, she said softly. He didn't turn. Neither did the truth. She closed the door behind her. You knew this would surface, she said. Yes. You knew it would put the children at risk. His jaw tightened. That is why I kept it buried. She crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away. Tell me, she said. Now. He exhaled slowly, as though opening a door he had sealed with his own ribs. My wife died 3 years ago, he began. Officially, an accident. A fall near the river after a storm. She listened without interruption. There were witnesses, he continued. Or so London claimed. Servants dismissed too quickly. Testimonies that shifted with time. And Halcombe, she asked. He believes, the Duke said quietly, that her death was encouraged. Her breath caught. By whom? By expectation, he replied bitterly. By a world that decided she was inconvenient. Silence pressed in. And do you believe it? She asked. He turned then, eyes dark, unguarded. I believe, he said, that my wife was unhappy, that she was watched, that she was alone. The word alone settled heavily between them. And I believe, he continued, voice rough, that London mistook her silence for weakness. Her chest tightened painfully. And now, she whispered, they're watching me. Yes. The word was immediate, certain. She nodded once, decision forming. The children were kept inside that day. Lessons cancelled. Walks postponed. Clara noticed immediately. Why are we hiding? She asked. The Duke crouched before her, voice gentle. We're not hiding, we're being careful. Clara crossed her arms. Careful is what people say when they're afraid. Thomas looked between them. Are you afraid? The Duke hesitated. She answered instead. Yes, she said softly, but fear doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it means something matters. Clara studied her. Do we matter? She knelt in front of both of them, hands resting lightly on their knees. "You matter more than anything," she said without hesitation. Thomas relaxed. Clara did not. "You're going to leave," the girl said suddenly. The words hit harder than any accusation London could offer. She swallowed. "Why would you think that?" "Because people always do," Clara replied quietly, "when things get hard." She felt something crack inside her. That afternoon, the Duke received confirmation of what they had feared. Halcombe had spoken, not openly, strategically. Questions were being asked, papers reviewed, old acquaintances contacted. London had found its leverage. The Duke paced the study, anger sharp beneath restraint. "He wants me to react," he said, "to isolate, to retreat." "And if you don't," she asked, "then he will escalate." She folded her hands, steadying herself. "Then we must think like him," she said, quietly, carefully. He stopped pacing. "What are you saying?" She met his gaze. "I should leave." The words hung there, unwanted but undeniable. "No," he said immediately. "If I stay," she continued, voice steady though her heart raced, "they will circle closer. They will test the children. They will use me." "I will not send you away," he said fiercely. She stepped closer. "You wouldn't be sending me," she said. "I would be choosing." His eyes searched her face, anguish written openly now. "This is exactly what they want," he said. "You disappearing." She shook her head. "They want you weakened, distracted, afraid." She took his hands, warm, familiar, grounding. "This is how we deny them that." He closed his eyes briefly, pain etched into every line of his face. "And what does it cost you?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Everything that matters," she told the children herself. "Not everything." Enough. Clara listened in rigid silence. Thomas clutched her sleeve. "You're lying," Clara said. "You promised you wouldn't leave because you were afraid." She knelt before her. "I'm not afraid," she said gently. "I'm brave." Clara's eyes filled. "That's worse," Thomas whispered. "When will you come back?" She hesitated, just a breath too long. "Soon," she said. Clara stood abruptly. "You're doing this for us." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Clara turned away, furious tears streaking her face. Thomas hugged her tightly. The Duke watched from the doorway, helpless. That night she packed quietly, not everything, only what she needed. She paused at the nursery door, listening to the children's breathing. Then, at the threshold of the Duke's room, he stood by the window, coat already on, as if prepared to follow her into exile. "I will fix this," he said quietly. She stepped closer. "I know." "I will expose Halcombe," he continued. "I will clear my wife's name." She reached up, touching his cheek. "Do it," she whispered, "but do it without worrying about me." He caught her wrist gently. "Don't make this sound final." She met his gaze, eyes shining, resolute. "Some loves," she said softly, "are proven by staying. And some," she added, "by leaving." Silence wrapped around them. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. Their foreheads touched. Not a kiss, a promise suspended. "I love you," he said quietly, finally unafraid of the word. Her breath trembled. "I know," she whispered. "That's why this hurts." She pulled away before she could falter. At dawn, the carriage waited. Snow fell lightly, almost tender. The Duke stood beside the children as she descended the steps. Clara did not look at her. Thomas waved with 2 fingers, fighting tears. She climbed into the carriage. The door closed, and Ashford disappeared behind falling snow. But London had made a mistake, because absence did not weaken her. It sharpened the truth. London mistook her silence for surrender. It always did. Weeks passed, and with them came a false sense of victory. Teacups clinked more easily again. Doors reopened selectively. Whispers shifted direction, hungry for a new spectacle. Ashford, however, did not return to what it had been. The Duke did not retreat. He advanced. He began with facts, not declarations, not outrage. Records. He reopened accounts tied to the riverbank. He summoned dismissed servants, quietly, respectfully. He listened without interruption to stories that had been flattened by time and fear. Patterns emerged. A carriage seen twice where it should not have been once. A note burned too quickly, a witness paid to forget. Lord Halcombe hovered at the edges of every inconsistency. The Duke did not confront him. He collected him, like evidence. The children noticed the change. Thomas watched his father study late into the night. "He looks like he's hunting," Thomas whispered to Clara. Clara nodded. "He's not." "What then?" "He's remembering." They did not say her name, but they felt it. Absence had taught them its shape. London pushed back. Articles appeared, carefully worded. Questions about propriety resurfaced. Suggestions that the Duke's judgment had been clouded. He answered none of it. Instead, he hosted smaller gatherings, intimate, deliberate, where conversation could not hide behind crowds, where truth, when spoken calmly, sounded like authority. And people listened, because power, when quiet, is terrifying. One afternoon, as winter softened toward early spring, a letter arrived at Ashford, unsealed, unadorned. The Duke recognized the handwriting immediately. His hand stilled. "I have something you need to see." No signature. He didn't need one. She had not gone far. She had gone deep, to places where truth slept uneasily, to women who had been dismissed as dramatic, to corners of London that remembered what ballrooms preferred to forget. She learned names, dates, connections, and the cost of being inconvenient. When she finally returned, she did not announce herself. She arrived at dusk. The children were in the garden. Clara saw her first. She froze, then ran. Thomas followed, breathless, joy and disbelief tangled together. "You came back," Thomas gasped. She knelt, catching them both. "I promised I would," she said. Clara clung fiercely. "I didn't believe you." She held her tighter. "I know." The Duke watched from the terrace, did not move, did not speak, until she lifted her head and met his gaze. Everything he had restrained surged forward. He crossed the distance in seconds. "You're here," he said, voice breaking the smallest amount. "I am," she replied. He did not touch her. Not yet. "Did you find something?" he asked. She nodded. "Enough." They spoke late into the night, quietly, urgently. She laid out what she had uncovered, carefully, precisely. Lord Halcombe's involvement was not direct. It was worse. He had facilitated, redirected, benefited. "She threatened to leave," she said softly. "Your wife." The Duke's breath hitched. "She had proof," she continued, "of funds mismanaged, of favors exchanged." He closed his eyes. "And when she refused to be quiet," she finished, "London decided she was inconvenient." Silence thickened. "Halcombe didn't push her," she added, "but he knew who would." The Duke's jaw tightened, resolve settling into something unmovable. "Then I will end him," he said calmly, "with truth." The confrontation came sooner than expected. Lord Halcombe arrived at Ashford uninvited, confidence sharpened by assumption. He found the Duke waiting, and her seated openly, unapologetically. "I see you've returned," Halcombe said smoothly. She met his gaze. "I never left." The Duke spoke next. "You will answer my questions," he said, "or you will answer London's." Halcombe smiled thinly. "You presume much." "No," the Duke replied. "I have evidence." The colour drained, just slightly. Enough. By the time Halcombe left, his certainty had collapsed into calculation, and calculation is the beginning of fear. News travelled fast, faster when guided. By the end of the week, London buzzed, not with scandal, but with reckoning. Old alliances frayed, quiet apologies surfaced. Invitations arrived again, not timid this time. Ashford did not respond, because something larger was being decided. She stood once more in the ballroom, empty, echoing. The Duke joined her. "You could have stayed away," he said softly. "I could have," she agreed. "Why didn't you?" She turned to him. "Because you chose me," she said, "and because your children deserve to see what that means." He took her hands then. No hesitation, no fear. "I want you here," he said, "not as protection, not as defiance." She smiled faintly. "As what, then?" "As my future," he said. "If you will have it." Her breath caught, not in surprise, in recognition. "Yes," she said simply. He exhaled, a sound like release, because silence had not erased her, it had refined her. And now, with the truth in hand and London watching, only one chapter remained. London did not collapse when the truth surfaced. It adjusted. That was its greatest talent. The exposure of Lord Halcombe arrived not with spectacle, but with inevitability. Documents circulated quietly. Testimonies resurfaced with renewed courage. Names once whispered found their way into respectable conversations that could no longer pretend ignorance. Halcombe did not deny it. He reframed it. But reframing only works when the audience is willing to look away. This time, they weren't. He withdrew from public life within the week, first politely, then permanently. Invitations stopped. Doors closed. The city that had once protected him now found him inconvenient. London had learned nothing. But Ashford had learned everything. The Duke stood before a small assembly in his own ballroom, not grand, not crowded, intentional. Those present were not there for entertainment. They were there because truth had summoned them. He spoke calmly. "My wife was not weak," he said. "She was silenced. No dramatics, no plea, just fact. I failed her once," he continued. "I will not fail again." There was no applause. There was something better. Respect. When he finished, he did not look to London for approval. He turned to her, and in that moment, everyone understood. Later, when the house had quieted and the guests had gone, Ashford felt different again. Not tense, not watchful. Whole. She stood in the garden with the children, early evening light painting the world soft. Thomas chased the dog in triumphant circles. Clara watched her carefully. "You stayed," Clara said. "Yes." "You came back," the girl added. "Yes," Clara nodded once. "Good." Then, after a pause, she said quietly, "You can be our mothers if you want." The words were not desperate. They were offered. Her chest tightened. "I won't replace anyone," she said gently. Clara shrugged. "I don't want replacing, I want choosing." She knelt, eyes level. "I choose you," she said simply. Clara smiled, slow, radiant, unafraid. The Duke found her later in the empty ballroom. Candlelight glowed softly, reflecting off polished floors that had once hosted judgment and fear. Now, they held something else. "You could have walked away," he said quietly. She turned to him. "I know. You could have demanded safety instead of truth. I could have. You could have taken a title and avoided all of this." She smiled faintly. "That would have been easier." He stepped closer. "But you didn't." "No," she said. "Because love that survives by silence isn't love." He reached for her hands. "They will call you Duchess," he said, "if you wish." She studied his face. The man who had learned to stand. The father who had learned to stay. "And if I don't?" she asked. "Then they will still know you belong here," he replied, "because this house already does." Her breath trembled. "Say it," she whispered. He didn't hesitate. "I love you," he said. "Not for what you saved, but for who you are, Tears welled, not of pain, of arrival. "I love you too," she replied, "not because you chose me, but because you learned how." They kissed then, not hurried, not desperate. A promise fulfilled. Spring arrived gently. Ashford bloomed, the children laughed freely, the halls echoed with life that no longer feared interruption. London watched from a distance, careful now, because the story it had tried to control had escaped its grip, and the woman it had tried to erase had become impossible to ignore. She did not need approval. She had a family, she had love, and she had learned the most dangerous lesson of all. That courage, once chosen, does not ask permission to remain. Some women change their lives by staying silent. Others change everything by refusing to disappear. Love is not proven by comfort, but by courage shared.